Hey guys, welcome back to Ripe Stories. In this Reddit Prorevenge story, I came back to my grandmother's beach house after years abroad and found strangers living in it. Someone had sold it illegally while I was grieving, and here is how I destroyed everyone involved. Let's dive right into the video. But the first one is titled, I will park where I choose, posted on r/PettyRevenge. So I live in a block of flats, apartments, and we have 2 parking lots for the residents. The big parking lot holds nearly all the cars. The parking lot where I park only has 5 bays and it is close to the back entrance. My flat is almost next to that door. Also, the bays are unreserved and it is first come first serve. We have a lady who also uses the parking lot, and when she goes out, she puts a bucket in the bay so that nobody else takes her parking. She also regularly will use a different parking spot for her big-ass people carrier. I generally don't care, but when she parks in such a way that I battle to get out, then I get upset. I've tried talking to her to ask that she makes sure that I can get out, and she tells me in no uncertain terms that she is married to the chairman of the HOA and she will park where she wants, and if I have a problem, to take it up with the chairman of the HOA. Well, now for the petty revenge. My youngest daughter has a really beat up car, more like a bumper car, and the bucket lady moved parkings again yesterday and she reversed into her new parking. So my daughter followed suit and also reverse parked, but made sure that she left about 3 inches between her car and the driver's side door while still being in her own parking bay. To add insult to injury, when she parked her monstrosity, she left about 6 inches between the cars. I would love to be there when she has to go out. And yeah guys, if you ever got any sort of parking revenge on your entitled neighbors, please let us know in the comments or let us know about it on r/Ripe Stories on Reddit, where you can post your own stories and there's a chance that I will read them in a video. Also, if you enjoyed these stories, please don't forget to like the video and leave a comment because that would help me tremendously. Either way, the next one is from r/Prorevenge and is titled HOA sold my inherited beach house before I moved in. So here is some backstory. My grandmother owned a small beachfront property in Southeast Asia. Not gonna name the specific country because legal proceedings are still technically open, but those of you familiar with the region will probably figure it out. The property had been in my family for decades, long before the area even got developed and long before any of these fancy resort communities started popping up around it. My grandparents bought it back when it was basically just fishermen's huts and coconut trees, and they built a modest 2-story house there and spent their retirement years enjoying the ocean views. My grandfather passed about 15 years ago and my grandmother followed him a few years after. I was living abroad at the time, working in tech, and couldn't get back for the funeral. I know that sounds cold, but international bureaucracy doesn't care about your grief timeline. My mother handled the estate initially, but she passed away unexpectedly about 3 years after my grandma, which left me as the sole surviving heir to several family properties, including the beach house. Now, here's where things get complicated. Because I was abroad and because there was a mountain of estate paperwork to sort through involving multiple properties, bank accounts and legal documents in a language I only partially understood, the process of officially transferring everything into my name took years. I'm talking about death certificates that needed to be authenticated, inheritance tax filings, property title transfers, the whole bureaucratic nightmare. I hired a local lawyer to handle it and she was doing her job, but these things just take forever in that part of the world. During this time, the beach house just sat empty. I was not worried about it because, my grandmother had paid a neighbor, an older woman who had been a friend for years, to check on the property occasionally. She would send me photos every few months showing everything was fine. The house was there, the doors were locked, the roof was intact, no problems. And then the neighbor died. She was in her 80s, so it was not unexpected, but it meant I no longer had eyes on the ground. I tried to arrange for someone else to check on the place, but I was dealing with my own life abroad. My mother's estate on top of my grandmother's, and honestly, I just let it slide for longer than I probably should have. About 2 years went by where I didn't have anyone physically visiting the property. And yeah, this is when the neighborhood association decided to make their move. See, in the years since my grandparents bought the place, the area had transformed. What used to be a sleepy fishing village became a hot destination for vacation homes, boutique resorts, and wealthy expats looking for cheap beachfront properties. A neighborhood association had formed, made up primarily of newer residents who had bought into the developments that sprung up around the original properties. They called themselves an HOA, which is not really how things work in that country, but they acted like they had authority over the whole area. My grandmother's property was a thorn in their side. It was one of the original lots, predating the association by decades, and it had never been part of their organization. Also, my grandparents never signed anything, never paid dues, never acknowledged their existence whatsoever. The association hated this because my grandmother's property was in a prime location right on the beach with the best ocean access in the area. Every time they tried to impose rules or collect fees, my grandmother would politely tell them to pound sand. According to stories my mother told me, my grandma once chased the HOA president of her property with a broom because he kept leaving notices on her door. After my grandmother passed and the house sat empty, the HOA saw their opportunity. I found out what happened when I finally got all the paperwork sorted and flew back to take possession of the property. This was supposed to be a happy trip. I'd spent years dealing with grief and bureaucracy, and I was finally gonna see my grandmother's house again, maybe fix it up, maybe use it as a vacation home, and maybe even retire there eventually. So then I landed, I hired a driver and headed to the property. Except when I got there, someone else was living in it already. I stood at the gate looking at my grandma's house, the house I had visited dozens of times as a child, the house where I had learned to swim in the ocean, and there was a strange family having breakfast on the front porch. They looked at me like I was the intruder. I asked them what the hell they were doing in my house. The man, middle-aged guy with a gut and an attitude, told me that this was his house and I needed to leave before he called security. I told him this was my grandmother's property and I had the title documents to prove it. He laughed and said he had bought this property legally through the neighborhood association and he had his own documents. That's when my stomach dropped. I called my lawyer immediately. She was just as confused as I was and told me to meet her at her office with whatever documents the current occupants could provide. Over the next few days, I pieced together what had happened. The HOA had declared my grandma's property as abandoned. They had filed paperwork with the local land registry office claiming the house had been vacant for years with no sign of any owner. They claimed they had made numerous attempts to contact the owner with no response, which was a complete lie. And then, using connections with some corrupt local officials at the registry office, they had somehow managed to get a certificate of abandonment issued, which allowed them to auction off the property. The auction was a joke, it was not public, it wasn't advertised, and the only bidder was a guy who just happened to be the nephew of the HOA president. He had purchased the property for a fraction of its actual value, paid off whoever needed to be paid, and moved in with his family. All of this happened about 8 months before I arrived. When my lawyer explained this to me, I couldn't speak for several minutes. The rage building in my chest was unlike anything I'd ever felt. This was not just property, this was my grandmother's home, the place where my mother had grown up, the only physical connection I had left to that side of my family, and these people had stolen it while I was overseas dealing with the aftermath of losing everyone I loved. My lawyer, to her credit, immediately recognized the severity of what we were actually dealing with, and she told me that what the HOA and the buyer had done was multiple levels of illegal. Filing a false abandonment claim was fraud, falsifying attempts to contact the owner was forgery, and colluding with registry officials to push through illegal paperwork was bribery. Selling property you don't own is theft. We had a case, a very strong case, but she warned me that it would take time and money to pursue it properly, and I told her I had both. What followed was about 1.5 years of methodical, painstaking work to build an airtight case and systematically dismantle everyone involved in stealing my property. But first, I needed evidence. My lawyer filed requests with the land registry for all documents related to the abandonment claim and subsequent sale. We got copies of everything, and it was damning. The homeowner association had submitted declarations claiming they had sent registered letters to the property owner at multiple addresses with no response. Except they had sent those letters to addresses that had nothing to do with my family. One was for a commercial building in the capital city, one was for an address that didn't even exist, and they had fabricated the whole attempt at contact. We also obtained copies of their alleged inspections of the property showing it was abandoned and deteriorating. The reports describe broken windows, a collapsed roof section, and graffiti on the walls. Funny thing about that though, remember those photos the neighbor used to send me? I still had them, timestamped and everything, photos from the months leading up to her death, showing the house in perfect condition, no broken windows, no collapsed roof, no graffiti. The HOA had simply fabricated their inspection reports too. Next though, I went after the registry officials who had approved this mess. Through some careful investigation, my lawyer discovered that the official who had signed off on the abandonment certificate had a history of suspicious property transfers in the area. A pattern of valuable lots being declared abandoned and sold to connected buyers. Once we compiled this pattern, we had something much bigger than just my case. I also did something that turned out to be cruel actually. I tracked down the family of the neighbor who used to watch my grandmother's property. Her son still lived in the area, and when I explained what had happened, he was furious on my behalf. He told me his mother had complained multiple times about the HOA harassing her, asking questions about my grandma's property, trying to get information about whether anyone was maintaining it, and she had told them repeatedly that the property had an owner abroad who was handling estate matters. They absolutely knew the property was not abandoned, they just did not care. I got the son to provide a written statement about his mother's interactions with the HOA, and that statement documented specific occasions when HOA representatives were informed the property had an active owner. This directly contradicted their claims of being unable to locate or contact the owner. And yeah, with all this evidence, my lawyer and I prepared our legal assault. We filed a civil suit against the HOA, its president, and the nephew who had purchased the property, seeking to void the sale and recover damages. We also filed criminal complaints for fraud, forgery, and corruption against the individuals involved. But here is where I got creative with my revenge. The HOA president, the main architect of the scheme, was a retired businessman who fancied himself a big shot in the community. The HOA president loved the prestige it gave him. His wife was heavily involved in local social circles and always organizing charity events, positioning themselves as pillars of the community. Their reputation was everything to them. I guess also, guys, the mafia considers themselves to be pillars of the community as well, so at least they have something in common. Anyway, I made sure their reputation was the first thing to crumble. Through my lawyer, I contacted a local journalist who covered real estate and corruption issues. I gave her everything, all the documents, all the evidence, the whole story of how a foreign heir had his family property stolen by a neighborhood association while he was overseas handling his mother's death. The journalist verified everything independently and ran a feature story that got significant attention. The article was devastating. It named the HOA president, documented his nephew's sweetheart deal, exposed a corrupt registry official, and included quotes from other longtime residents who had issues with the HOA. And yeah, it turns out I was not their first victim, just the one who fought back the hardest. The story included photos of my grandma's house from when she was alive, a picture of her on the front porch from years ago that my mother had kept, and it humanized the theft in a way that dry legal documents never could. The HOA president tried to deny everything, but the documents spoke for themselves. His wife's charity organization quietly asked her to step back from leadership roles. Their invitations to social events dried up. People in the community started crossing the street to avoid them. And let me tell you, for people whose whole identity was wrapped up in their social standing, this was torture. The nephew who had bought the property panicked. He tried to reach out through intermediaries, offering to sell the property back to me at the price he had paid for it. I told my lawyer to reject the offer in the most dismissive way possible. I was not interested in buying back what was already mine. I wanted it returned, I wanted compensation for their illegal occupation, and I wanted them to face consequences. When the criminal investigation picked up steam, things got even better. The registry official who had signed off on the fraudulent document tried to claim he had been deceived by the HOA's paperwork, but investigators found evidence of payments, cash deposits into accounts controlled by his family members around the time the abandonment certificate was issued. He was suspended pending investigation and eventually charged with multiple counts of corruption. The HOA president was called in for questioning multiple times. I heard through my lawyer that he hired expensive defense attorneys and tried to claim he had acted in good faith based on information we provided to him. That defense crumbled when we produced a statement from the neighbor's son documenting the HOA had been explicitly told the property had an owner. Meanwhile, the civil case was progressing. The nephew's lawyers tried every delay tactic in the book, but the judge was not having it. The evidence was overwhelming. They had sold property they had no right to sell using documents they knew were false. The buyer had participated in what was obviously a sweetheart deal at a rigged auction. There was no good faith defense here. About 14 months after we filed suit, we got our judgment. The sale was voided entirely. The property reverted to my ownership. The nephew was ordered to vacate within 60 days and was liable for damages including the rental value of the property for the period he had occupied it, my legal fees and additional compensation for the distress caused by his illegal occupation of my family home. But it didn't stop there. The court found the HOA and its president personally liable for the fraud. They were ordered to pay substantial damages to me, covering my investigation costs, the legal fees I'd incurred fighting to get my property back, lost value from deferred maintenance during the occupation, and punitive damages for the willful nature of their misconduct. The total damages I was awarded came out to roughly 4 times what the nephew had paid for the property in their fake auction. The HOA president tried to claim the association's funds could cover it, but the court held him personally liable since he had personally orchestrated the scheme. He had to liquidate investment accounts and take out loans against his own property to pay the judgment. On the criminal side, the registry official was convicted and sentenced to actual prison time, not long but enough to end his career and pension. Furthermore, the HOA president was charged with fraud and forgery. His case is still making its way through the system, but my lawyer says conviction is likely and he's facing at least a suspended sentence and significant fines. The nephew walked away without criminal charges since prosecutors determined he was more of an opportunist than an active conspirator, but he lost the house and he lost all the money he had paid for it. He lost the renovation costs he had put into it, and he is liable for the occupation damages. He is financially ruined, and from what I hear, his wife left him over the stress of it all. The HOA itself was forced to dissolve. The scandal and the legal judgments bankrupted the organization. The remaining members, most of whom had no idea what their president had been doing, scattered. Some tried to form a new association with proper governance, but the whole concept was poisoned by what had happened. Last I heard, the area has no formal neighborhood organization anymore, which suits the longtime residents just fine. I finally took possession of my grandmother's house about 3 months after the judgment, once the nephew had cleared out. He had left the place a mess, probably out of spite. Trash everywhere, some deliberate damage to fixtures, petty stuff. I documented everything for an additional damages claim and then spent a few weeks personally cleaning and repairing. Being back in that house for the first time in years was emotional in ways I didn't expect. I found a few things the nephew's family had missed. Small items that must have been my grandmother's. A chipped teacup in a cabinet, an old calendar with her handwriting on it, a faded photograph tucked behind a shelf. These people had occupied my family's home for over a year and hadn't even bothered to fully clear out the memories of the woman who had lived there for decades. It made me angry all over again, but also grateful that some pieces of her remained. I've since renovated the house properly. New roof, updated plumbing, fresh paint inside and out, and I installed a security system and hired a legitimate property management company to maintain it when I am not there. I visit several times a year now, and I'm actually considering retiring there eventually, exactly as I'd originally planned before all this happened. The money from the judgment covered all my legal expenses and renovation costs with plenty left over. The HOA president thought he was untouchable, a big fish in a small pond who could take whatever he wanted because he had connections and money, but now he's financially crippled, socially outcast and facing criminal charges. His nephew thought he was getting the deal of a lifetime. Now he's divorced, broke and living in a rented apartment according to what I heard. The corrupt official thought he could take bribes forever without consequences, but now he's a convicted criminal. Meanwhile, I'm sitting on my grandma's porch watching the same ocean she watched for decades in a house that is legally, rightfully and permanently mine. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. And the next one is another petty revenge story. So I, 19 female, quit my crappy job at a fast food chain that has a certain arch recently and remembered this story, which I thought was funny. Unfortunately, this is a very true story, so I know it's a bit ridiculous. We had these regulars that would come through the drive-thru near enough every day, and I was always the one handing food out the window. They were an older couple and I was happy to make accommodations to allow handing them food and drinks easier. However, it became increasingly difficult to allow their awful attitude towards me. For context, my branch of the restaurant was one of 5 in my town, but the rest were 20-ish minutes away. We were the worst rated, as we were small but extremely busy as a result, and run by literal teenagers half the time. Lunch and dinner rushes were a mess as managers were more concerned with stats than actually running the place well. This couple would come through at our busiest time, order the same thing, shouting at the order taker, payment window, and me for how slow we were. Our small kitchen was unable to accommodate how busy we got, so wait times were often 300 plus seconds, supposed to be 120. Every time they would yell at me for how busy we were, how slow, how their food would be cold, how it wasn't fair to make an old couple wait, and every time the man would ask for extra cream on his latte, and if he didn't get it he would become irate. I would do it for him because I had learned to take the bullet for taking too long rather than deal with this guy. So much so that he would call me his creamy girl with a crap-eating grin on his face, and every time I would laugh but explain that it wasn't appropriate. On this day, I was maybe 16 or 17, we were flat out busy, 600 plus seconds, when the cream couple arrived. I asked them to pull into a bay and we would bring the food out so we could serve the next customer whose order was prepared. He went ballistic on me, refusing to move, shouting at me, slamming his hands on the dashboard, the classic temper tantrum, and refusing to move. This went on for so long, I started explaining to my manager the issue, who would not take any crap, the situation, and she phoned the police to remove the guy. This is usually enough of a threat to get the customer to go, but not this time. He said something along the lines of, "Every time I come here we have to wait and my cream melts. And every time we come here you are working. You are an awful person." I'm not the kind of person to take crap from people, you get the energy you give, but up until now I'd been forgiving. So I blurted out while he was yelling at me. "So? Go somewhere else, it's called problem solving, dude." He was stunned before lashing out again, explaining this place was his only option and there was nowhere I could make him go anywhere else. So I said, "Wanna bet?" Latte and extra cream in hand, I poured the coffee all over the roof and window of his Fiat Panda. To clarify, I was gonna pour it out the window, but he was parked too close, and as I was thinking about it, I realized that I could safely pour it into his car window and roof and not burn him. I then asked him again to pull around and his order would be ready soon, and slammed the window. I then promptly burst into tears out of exhaustion and hate and began making my way to my manager to tell her my crime. The police turned up basically straight after, and we explained what was going on while the cream man was trying to open the window. They asked him to go and explained he was now trespassing if he didn't go. Long story short, next thing I saw was this 70-plus-year-old man swinging at this copper before quickly getting put into the cop car, leaving his very frail wife still set in shock, latte-less. Did this man deserve to get arrested? Probably not. Was it appropriate for me to pour coffee on his car? Maybe, maybe not. You decide if I'm the a-hole here if you want. Either way, it felt good, plus I did not lose my job. Edit some more of the crappy things this guy would do to explain my OOT reaction. He would throw a temper tantrum if we were too busy to top up on his extra cream. If there wasn't enough cream, we would have to remake the drink. The coffee machines could take 2 minutes to pour sometimes, and would then complain about how long the order took. Often he would ask me to add like 5 packets of sugar to his pre-syruped latte, which I would happily accommodate for if we were not busy, but also remind him that there was like 3 pumps of syrup in there already. He would then complain that it was too sweet and accused me several times of adding more sugar than he asked for. Remaking the drink would ensue. This was not the first time he refused to park up either. Sometimes he would, so it wasn't even that he didn't understand the concept like some didn't, but I was always happy to reiterate what he had to do. Worst of all, he would personally blame me if his service was not good enough, even if I didn't have anything to do with the drive-thru. My best friend was working on my day off and he apparently started screaming for the pink-haired girl to apologize for ruining his order when I was at home. I know I overreacted, I will own up, but this is borderline abuse. And the next one is a fantastic malicious compliance story, which is titled, "I quit smoking but my buddy kept offering me cigarettes." So as the title says, I decided to quit smoking. This happened about 30 years ago, and my best friend at the time, let's call him John because that's his name, was clearly jealous about the fact that I could quit and he couldn't. So he kept offering me cigarettes. Every time he would light up a pack, he would smoke and offer the pack to me as well, saying, "Want one?" along with a smug little smile. One day we are standing on his balcony and he pulls out his deck of smokes. As per routine, he gives me a smug little smile and offers me a smoke. This time, I say yes and take one. His eyebrows lift in surprise, but he reaches into his pocket to grab his lighter. As he hands it to me, I begin tearing the cigarette up, tiny piece by piece, and sprinkling the shredded cigarette off the edge of his balcony. "What the hell?" he says annoyed. "I thought you said you wanted a smoke." "I did. This is just what I want to do with them now. By all means, keep offering to me." And he never offered me a smoke again. And yeah guys, thank you for watching. I will see you again tomorrow.